God is in control, and when God says it's time for an empire to fall, it doesn't matter how important or how powerful that empire is, it's going to fall. Okay? So, Daniel chapter 7. So in Daniel chapter 7, now it's Daniel that is given a vision. Daniel chapter 2 is Nebuchadnezzar that has a dream, but Daniel chapter 7, it is Daniel that is given the vision. Okay? Let's have a look at verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So let me just stop there. So Belshazzar is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So his father, Nabonidus, I think I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Nabonidus or something like that. Has made Belshazzar like co-regent, like co-king with him. Right? They're like dual kings. Right? And so he's the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So it says the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had dreams and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Okay, so like I said, this is about 15 years before Medo-Persians invade Babylon and kill Belshazzar, and the empire falls, and the Medo-Persians take over. Okay, let's move on to verse 2. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So Daniel now begins to describe these beasts that he sees coming up out of the sea. And the first one he mentioned, make reference to here, is like a lion. So typically when folks are trying to interpret Bible prophecy, this is at the point where they kind of stop, or they begin to speculate, right? What in the world does it mean he saw beasts coming up out of the sea? So one of the important rules of interpreting Bible prophecy is you let the Bible explain itself, right? So what does a beast mean in Bible prophecy? Well, Daniel tells us in verse 17, so we don't have to speculate, right? We're not going to go around, well, what do you think it is, or what do you think it is, or what do you think it is, right? Because that just fosters all kinds of wackiness, like you hear all over the place. Let the Bible explain it himself. So in verse 17, you see, it says, those great beasts which are four are what? 4 kings that arise out of the earth. So the beast represents what? A king. Then verse 23 says, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, right? So when you see a beast in Bible prophecy, the Bible tells us that refers to a king or a kingdom. Okay? So Daniel is in bed, he's sleeping, and he sees these 4 beasts coming out of the sea. So these are not 4 individuals, but rather 4 kingdoms, 4 empires, 4, right? So, but let's go back here, and you notice that it says a couple of things. He says, behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Right? So he's using symbolic language here. He's talking about this wind. This wind is blowing and it's stirring up the sea. What does that mean? Well, one of the contemporaries of Daniel was a prophet by the name of Jeremiah. And when we go to Jeremiah, we begin to get a few insights here. So let's go to Jeremiah. Of the earth, because the Lord has a controversy with the nations. He is entering into judgment with all flesh. As for the wicked, he has given them to the sword, declares the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, evil is going forth from nation to nation, and a great what? A great storm. I think more of you can read than just Reuben, right? Right? I heard Reuben. I didn't hear anybody else. Everybody else is shy? Maybe, right?
I'm not sure.
Well, you spoke, though, which was good. Let's hear that again. What does he see? A great what? A great storm, right, is being stirred up from the remotest parts of the earth, right? So when you see wind in Bible prophecy, that means war. That means strife. That means trouble, okay? So remember, Daniel's in the vision. He sees the wind blowing on the sea, right? Now, what does the sea represent? So let's go to Isaiah. So there's another important principle in understanding Bible prophecy. You have to look at Bible prophecy within the context of the whole Bible. Right? So you see we've gone to the book of Daniel for interpretation. We've gone to Isaiah or Jeremiah, right? And now we're going to go to the book of Isaiah to get further clarification. So I'm curious about what does it mean that the sea, the wind means what? War. So what is he sees them coming up out of the sea. What does the sea mean? Let's see what Isaiah can tell us. Alas, the uproar of many peoples who roar like the roaring of the what? The seas, and the rumbling of nations who rush on like the rumbling of what? Mighty waters. So Revelation 17 gives us also another aspect to seas, and you'll see here it says, the waters which you saw are what? Are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Right? And so this gives us a bit of a underpinning for what Daniel is seeing. So he sees the wind, which means strife and war. He sees them coming out of the great sea. It's interesting that the enemies of God in prophecy are always portrayed as coming up out of the sea. Right? In Revelation 13, that first beast comes up out of the sea. The enemies of God come out of the sea. But the seas also represents nations and people and multitudes. Okay? Right? So, and then he sees these beasts coming forward. And what do these beasts represent? Kings or kingdoms. That's right. So, this is the pattern. How this prophecy begins. It is exactly the same succession now that we saw in Daniel chapter 2, right? So where Babylon in Daniel 2 is represented by a head of gold, Medo-Persia by the chest and arms of silver, Greece by the thighs of bronze, Rome by the legs of iron, and then the feet of iron and clay represent divided Europe. You're going to see a bit of a parallel in Daniel chapter 7 to Daniel chapter 2. Again, not to geek out on you guys, but it's what we call in theology repetition and enlargement. So you're going to find in Bible prophecy sometimes God goes over the same territory twice, like Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. You see part of it in Daniel chapter 8 also. So why does God repeat himself? Well, that's the repetition part. But you'll notice that in every one of these prophecies, the direction that the prophecy goes is different. So in Daniel chapter 2, the focus is the second coming of Jesus, right? That God is going to establish a kingdom that will last forever, because we've just seen this succession of kingdoms. In Daniel chapter 8, you see a succession of powers, not beginning with Babylon, but with Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. But the focus of Daniel 8 is verse 14, which is the 2,300 days. Unto 2,300 days, the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Here in Daniel chapter 7, you're going to see that while he repeats certain things, the focus is going to be on something else. So that's the enlargement piece. So repetition and enlargement. Repeats, but then goes to a specific point. So interestingly, you say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that the eagle-winged lion represents Babylon? All right, like how do we know that? Well, there are some references to that. I've had the opportunity, I was in Berlin, I had the opportunity to go to the Pergamon Museum. And I don't know if you ever heard of the Pergamon Museum. One of the interesting things in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin is they have the Ishtar Gate there. So the gate of Babylon, the Ishtar Gate, that Daniel would have seen. I got to see that, right? And you'll see that there's the wall that are tiled, and on those tiled walls are eagle-winged lions, right? You also notice that the king of all metals is what? Gold. What is the king of all beasts? The lion, right? So you begin to see some parallels here, right? All kinds of things have been unearthed with monuments, sculptures of eagle-winged lions representing Babylon. Their archaeology is saturated with evidences of that. But you notice Daniel said that it had these wings and the wings were plucked. And I believe that's the way God was showing that kingdom was starting to deteriorate. They were 15 years away from being annihilated. I think they had any idea, although the writing literally was on the wall. That's Daniel chapter 5, right? The writing was going to be on the wall, but they were kind of oblivious to that. But Daniel saw that the wings were plucked, right? The decay or the collapse of that empire, right? And so when God decided that it was time for Babylon to fall, Babylon fell. The prophecy continues. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, it was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. Right? It's interesting in Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel is explaining the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, after he explains to him that the dream starts with you are this head of gold, right? Nebuchadnezzar must have felt pretty good about that, but then Daniel says something that would have been classified today as misinformation, right? Because it didn't make any sense. He said, but another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. And Nebuchadnezzar must have thought, wait a second, how does an inferior kingdom defeat a superior kingdom? How does that happen? That you can't. How does an inferior one, what are you talking about? Well, it doesn't matter if you're inferior or superior. What matters is where the unseen hand of God is going to direct it. And when God said it was time for Babylon to fall, guess what? Babylon fell. In Daniel 2, it's represented by the chest and the arms of silver. Interestingly enough, guess what metal the Medo-Persians used to collect their taxes? They used silver, right? Now, how did Daniel know that hundreds of years before that happened? Well, Daniel knew because it was the unseen hand of God that was directing things. Bible prophecy is God telling history before history actually happens. It's history in advance. In Daniel 7, the second empire is represented by a bear, but you'll notice a couple of things about the bear. What's curious about this bear? What does it say? It was what? It was raised up on one side, so the bear was kind of tilted. It was raised up on one side. Now, what in the world does the tilt of the bear represent? Well, the nation that came into it that defeated Babylon was Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia was a coalition empire, so it's made up of 2 parts. The Medes and the Persians, they came together. The Persians were the stronger of the 2, right? We hear of, Cyrus the Great, and right? We don't hear much about the Medes in history, right? And so the bear being raised up on one side is a visual that represents the Persians raising themselves up over the Medes because they were the stronger of the 2. You with me? And what does he have in his mouth? 3 ribs, right? Interestingly enough, and it says, arise and devour much flesh. Cyrus the Great was the first king of the Persians. He's the one that led the overthrow of Babylon. And he was a relatively decent, as far as warrior kings go, he was relatively decent, right? The kings that came after him were exceedingly cruel. And so it's interesting that it would say, arise and devour much flesh. But he has 3 ribs in his mouth. And so, since about, I don't know, for a few hundred years, we have interpreted that meaning there were 3 nations that Medo-Persia had to defeat in order for it to have world dominance. The first was Babylon, right? Then they took on Egypt, and then what was referred to as Lydia, which today would be modern-day Turkey. And so biblical scholars believe that those 3 ribs, and the 3 ribs being in its mouth, denotes the defeat of Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia, that then opened the door for Medo-Persia to become a world empire and have world dominance. You with me? Right? Now this kingdom too would not last forever, because Daniel saw that there would be another kingdom that would come after this one. So we've got the tilted bear now with the 3 ribs in his mouth representing Medo-Persia. It goes on, verse 6. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. I found this one fascinating, that you'll notice the symbolism, a number of symbols here that I think are really quite interesting. In the progression in Daniel chapter 2, which empire came after the Medo-Persians? We had Babylon, Medo-Persia, and then Greece. That's right. And so does this 4-headed leopard with 4 wings on its back represent Greece? Well, I believe it does. It's a couple of things. Interestingly enough, the leopard has on its back 4 wings of a bird. What do wings represent? Speed, right? If you wanted to depict a relatively fast animal, if you wanted to use an animal to depict speed, what animal could you pick? You could put a leopard, right? If you wanted to make the leopard really fast, what would you do? What would you put on its back? You'd put wings, but not 2 wings like the eagle's wings of the lion, right? This has got 4 wings, right? Depicting the speed. You go back through history, you realize that Alexander the Great, one of the incredible things of Alexander's conquest was the speed with which he conquered the world. Right? By the age of 33, Alexander the Great had conquered the entire world. Like there was nothing left for him to conquer. Right? He's 33 years old. Interestingly enough, here's a guy that's able to conquer the whole world, but he's unable to conquer himself. Right? He can have dominion over 20 million people, but he doesn't have dominion over his own self. And history says he goes back to Babylon, and his lifestyle catches up with him. And unexpectedly, at the age of 33, Alexander dies. He's on his deathbed, and they say to him, "To who goes the kingdom?" And he says, "To the strongest." And so what happens with the empire, with the Greek Empire, after the death, the unexpected death of Alexander the Great, history tells us that the empire was divided into how many parts? 4 parts, right? Represented by 4 heads on the leopard, right? How many heads were on the lion? How many heads were on the bear? Why were there 4 heads on the leopard? Like, how did God know, how did Daniel know, right, that Alexander would die without appointing an heir, a successor? Right? It's because Bible prophecy is the unseen hand of God directing history to where God wants it to go. God was able to share that with Daniel because God knew. Right? And so they take Alexander the Great's empire, they divide it into 4 parts according to his four generals: Cassander, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. right? These are, right? Now, again, interestingly enough, what's that? It says, divided house, right? Right? So with the division of the empire, it weakened the empire. It weakened Greece, right? And so that's why at some point they tried to pull things back together again. But that weakening of the empire, the Greek Empire, what it did was it opened the door now for Rome to step in and conquer the Greeks, right? And so the fourth beast we're going to see, and we're not going to be able to finish. We'll finish it next time. But the fourth beast, while all these other beasts are kind of, there's elements of here that we like, a lion, a bear, a leopard, wings of a bird, wings of an eagle, like that's all stuff that we can visualize. The fourth beast, however, is depicted differently. It says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge, what kind of teeth? Iron teeth. Interestingly enough, in Daniel chapter 2, the legs were made of what? Iron, representing the iron monarchy of Rome. This beast here has iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was what? Different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had what? 10 horns. The legs had feet with how many toes in Daniel 2? 10 toes. In Daniel chapter 7, the beast, right, has 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Right? This is the focus of Daniel chapter 7. It's getting down to this particular, to this point here. This is the focus of Daniel 7. It's the identity of that little horn that comes up amongst the 10 horns. Right? Now, when Daniel saw this intrigued him. And in verse 19, I think, it says, then I desired to know what? Of which? Of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others. Exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, its nails of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces stamp. So this perplexed Daniel, and he had a certain interest in identifying what was this fourth beast. Here's what we know. It's under the rule of this little horn that comes out of this fourth beast that Satan's strategy for the destruction of the church shifted. And so whereas up until this point, Satan's primary strategy to do away with the church was through persecution, right, and using force to bring orthodoxy, right, to get people to follow by, through persecution and through force. It's under the leadership of this little horn that a new strategy is introduced, which is the strategy of deception, right? And so, let me just sort of give you a teaser for the next time we're together. And thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, trample it and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are what? 10 kings, who shall arise from this kingdom. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be what? different than the first ones. Let me just stop there. What happened to the Roman Empire? Was Rome defeated by another world empire like Babylon was, like Medo-Persia was, like Greece was? Was Rome defeated by another world empire? No. What happened to Rome? It was divided. Guess into how many parts? 10, not 9, not 11, exactly 10, like the 10 horns. Okay? So it says, and he shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints will be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So whatever this power is, and we'll look at that next time, here's what we know about it. When it comes up on the scene, 10 of the kings that were there previously, right, 3 of them are uprooted. So there were 10. This one comes up, making it 11, but 3 of the previous 10 are wiped out. Okay? He shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words. Right? Another translation says, shall speak blasphemous words. Right? Pompous words or blasphemous words means it will speak out against whom? Speaks out against God. So it's a power that comes. When it comes, 3 kingdoms are wiped out. It speaks out against God. It shall persecute the saints of the Most High, right? It shall intend to change times and law. And it will have a period of domination for times and half a time. Time there means a year. Times means 2 years, and half a time means half a year. So for 3.5 years, prophetically speaking, right, it will have dominion over the saints and over the church. So this talks about a power that comes out of the Roman Empire, is different than all the other ones. In its arising, 3 kingdoms are destroyed. It will persecute the saints. It will attempt to change times and laws. And it will have dominion for 1,260 years. And so the Bible is very clear in telling us who this is and what is that they would intend to do. Here's the moral of the story for today, right? The Bible is clear if we're not on God's side, right? We are what? Against him. There's no neutral ground, right? So we either make a decision for God. In our neutrality of not making a decision, guess what? That's against God, because there's only 2 positions. You're either for him or you're against him. There's no I'm kind of in between. There's no in between, right? And so as we move in closer and closer to the end of time, and I think you would all agree with me that we are very close to the end of time, the requirement for us to step forward and make a decision becomes more and more important, right? The Bible provides us all the clarity we need to understand the days we're living in and what's coming before us. That's not the issue. The issue rests in whether or not we're prepared to make that decision. Right? So you either for him or you're against him. There's no middle ground. I pray that as we leave, as we separate now, we come to the end of our service, that all of us have made a decision for him. And those of us that are living in their neutrality, you have to be pushed out of that either to one side or to the other. Right? Elisha said, if Baal is God, then worship him. If God is God, then worship him. But what you can't do is be in the middle. Right? Make your decision. Words of Joshua are, choose today whom you shall serve. But as for me and my household, we have chosen to serve the Lord. Amen.